What if I told you that in the next few minutes, you're going to hear something so simple, so devastatingly obvious, that when you finally understand it, you'll sit back and whisper to yourself, "Why didn't anyone tell me this sooner?" Because the idea you're about to encounter didn't come from a therapist's office, a best-selling book, or a Silicon Valley startup. It came from a man who grew up dirt poor on an Idaho farm and went on to change the minds of millions of people across 4 decades. And the strangest part, the most powerful thing he ever said fits into a single sentence, but I'm not going to give it to you yet. Section 1. The man behind the words. His name was Emmanuel James Rohn. The world knew him as Jim Rohn. And before he became one of the most quoted human beings in the history of personal development, before Tony Robbins called him his mentor, before his seminars filled arenas, Jim Rohn was broke. Embarrassed and running out of excuses at 25 years old. Picture this. It's 1955. A man knocks on Jim Rohn's door asking for a $1 donation to the Girl Scouts. And Jim Rohn, a grown adult, doesn't have it. He actually lies to the man's face. He says he already gave. And as he closes the door, he makes a quiet promise to himself, never again. Now here's what most people get wrong about that story. They think the turning point was the shame. They think it was the poverty. But Jim Rohn later said the real turning point was something far more uncomfortable than being broke. It was the moment he stopped blaming the economy, his boss, his upbringing, and his circumstances, and asked himself the one question that would rearrange his entire life. That question, we'll get to it, but first you need to understand why most people never ask it. Section 2. The philosophy nobody teaches you. Here's something Jim Rohn said that almost nobody talks about. He said that formal education will make you a living, but self-education will make you a fortune. Now, before you scroll past that because it sounds like another motivational poster, let me show you why those 11 words carry something most people spend their entire lives trying to figure out. Think about the last time you felt truly stuck. Maybe it was a job that wasn't going anywhere, a relationship circling the same arguments, a dream that kept getting pushed to someday. And if you're being honest with yourself, really honest, you probably knew what the problem was. You knew what needed to change, but you didn't change it. Why? Jim Rohn had a theory about this. He said that people don't lack information. They don't even lack motivation. Not really. What they lack is a philosophy, a personal set of guiding principles strong enough to pull them through the moments when emotion says quit and comfort says stay. And without that philosophy, all the goal setting and vision boards in the world are just decoration. So what does a personal philosophy actually look like? And here's where it gets interesting, because what Rohn described wasn't a list of rules. It wasn't a morning routine or a productivity hack. It was something much older, much quieter, and it all starts with how you talk to yourself. Section 3. The conversation in your head. Jim Rohn once told a room full of people, "You cannot speak poverty and expect to live in prosperity." And the audience laughed because it sounds obvious. But then he said something that made the room go completely silent. He said most people have a running internal dialogue that is so negative, so automatic, so deeply wired into their daily thinking, that they don't even recognize it as a choice anymore. Think about the voice in your head when something goes wrong, when you miss a deadline, when you compare yourself to someone more successful. When you look in the mirror and feel that familiar flicker of disappointment, what does that voice say? And more importantly, who taught it to say that? Because here's what the psychology of self-talk actually tells us. Research out of the University of Michigan found that the way you address yourself internally, specifically, whether you use first person or second person language, dramatically changes your ability to regulate emotion and perform under pressure. People who coach themselves with distance and clarity, what should you do next, rather than what am I going to do, It demonstrates measurably higher resilience and lower anxiety. Jim Rohn didn't have access to that study, but he lived it. He said, "Stand guard at the door of your mind." And the reason that line has been repeated millions of times isn't because it's poetic. It's because it describes, with almost uncomfortable precision, the single most important act of daily discipline a human being can practice. But discipline, Rohn argued, is actually the wrong word. And what he said instead is where this whole thing starts to crack open. Section 4, the word that changes everything. Rohn didn't talk much about discipline. He talked about consistency. And he drew a distinction between the two that most people never think about. Discipline, he said, implies force. It implies struggle. It implies that you are fighting yourself, dragging yourself to the gym, pushing yourself through the hard conversation, knuckling your way through another Monday. And when you're fighting yourself, you will eventually lose, because willpower is a resource. It depletes. But consistency is what happens when a small action becomes part of your identity, when it becomes so ordinary, so expected, so simply who you are that the struggle dissolves. He used a phrase that sounds almost too simple to be profound. Motivation is what gets you started. Habit is what keeps you going. Now here's the part people miss. Rohn wasn't talking about habits in the modern productivity app sense, tracking your water intake, stacking your routines, color, coding your calendar. He was talking about something deeper. He was talking about the habits of thought, the habit of curiosity, the habit of asking better questions, the habit of reading one page more than you think you have time for, the habit of treating every conversation as a chance to learn something. He said the difference between where you are and where you want to be can almost always be traced back to your daily habits of mind. Not your talent, not your connections, not your luck, your mind habits. And this is where we need to slow down. Because what Rohn said next at a seminar in the early 1980s to a crowd of maybe 300 people is the single most useful thing I have ever heard about the architecture of a successful human life. Section 5, the most powerful insight. He said this: you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. Now I know you've heard that line, but I want you to actually feel it for a second, not as a quote, not as a caption, as a live, breathing, terrifying fact about your current life. Think about the 5 people you spend the most time with right now, not who you wish you spent time with. Not your heroes or your mentors from YouTube, the actual, real human beings in your daily orbit, the ones at your dinner table, your office, your group chat. Now ask yourself, honestly, are those people pulling you up or pulling you down? Are they expanding your thinking or reinforcing your comfort zone? Are they modeling the life you want or the life you're trying to escape? Because here's the psychology behind why Rohn's observation is so devastating. Human beings are wired for what neuroscientists call social mirroring. We unconsciously adopt the beliefs, behaviors, vocabularies, and even the ambitions of the people closest to us. This isn't weakness, this is biology. Mirror neurons, the same neural mechanisms that allow babies to learn by observation, operate in adults constantly, silently, invisibly. Which means your environment isn't just influencing you. In a very real, measurable, neurological sense, it is building you. Every single day, Jim Rohn put it plainly. He said, "Don't join an easy crowd, you won't grow. Go where the expectations are high." And then he said something that hit differently in that room than it does on a motivational poster. He said, "If you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room." That's not about arrogance, that's about hunger, that's about choosing to remain a student always, even when the world tells you that you've arrived. But here's the thing nobody talks about when they share this idea. Moving toward better people, bigger thinking, and higher standards isn't comfortable. It doesn't feel inspiring at first. It actually feels like loss. And that's the part of the journey that breaks most people before it builds them. Section 6. The emotional cost of growth. Rohn was honest about this in a way that most speakers aren't. He didn't sell a fantasy. He didn't stand on stage and promise that success feels like a montage from a Rocky movie, that if you just believe hard enough and wake up at 5 a.m., everything clicks into place. He said growth feels like grief, not because something is dying, but because something is an old identity, an old story, an old version of yourself that was comfortable, familiar, and absolutely certain it was protecting you. And the people around you, the ones who knew you before, some of them won't like who you're becoming. Not because they're bad people, but because your growth holds up a mirror to their stagnation, and that mirror is uncomfortable for everyone. He told a story, and I want you to really hear this, about a man who came to him frustrated. The man said, "Jim, I've been working on myself for 2 years. I've changed so much, but my family still treats me like the old me. My friends still see me as the guy I used to be. It's like my growth is invisible." And Rohn looked at him and said, "Give it time and give it distance. You can't read the label from inside the jar." That line, "you can't read the label from inside the jar," is one of the most quietly devastating observations about human perception ever spoken from a stage, because it names something we all feel but can rarely articulate. The fact that the people closest to you are often the least equipped to see who you're becoming, not because they don't love you, but because their mental image of you was formed years ago, and the brain is extraordinarily resistant to updating its models. So, what do you do with that? How do you grow in an environment that doesn't recognize your growth? How do you stay committed to becoming someone new when everyone around you keeps calling you by your old name? Section 7. Rohn's answer was simple, and like all of his best ideas, it sounds almost too simple until you sit with it. He said, "Work harder on yourself than you do on your job, not for approval, not for validation, not to prove something to the people who doubted you. For one reason, and one reason only, because the quality of your life will never exceed the quality of the person living it." That's the sentence. That's the one I told you about at the beginning, the one that sounds obvious until you actually measure your daily life against it. Think about how much energy the average American puts into their career, their reputation, their social media presence, their appearance, and compare it to how much intentional time they invest in their own thinking, in reading, in reflection, in the uncomfortable practice of asking, "Am I the person who deserves the life I want?" Not "do I deserve it?" as a question of worthiness, but as a question of readiness. Because Jim Rohn believed, and the trajectory of his own life proved, that when you become the right person, the right opportunities don't have to be chased. They arrive, they align, not by magic, but by the simple, extraordinary logic that a prepared mind placed in a moving world will eventually meet its moment. He said, "Don't wish it were easier, wish you were better." And if you've been watching this video thinking, "That's inspiring, but what do I actually do tomorrow morning?" Here's the answer Jim Rohn would give you. Read for 30 minutes, not content, not news, not social media. A book about people who had to figure something out that you're trying to figure out. Write down 3 things you're grateful for, not because positivity is a magic trick, but because gratitude trains your attention to locate opportunity instead of obstacles. And then have one real conversation today. One conversation where you actually listen, where you ask a deeper question, where you treat the human in front of you like they are the most interesting person in the room. That's it, 30 minutes of reading, 3 lines in a notebook, one real conversation. Do that every day for a year, and you will not recognize the person looking back at you in the mirror. Jim Rohn died in 2009. But the ideas he put into the world are still spreading, still landing in rooms, still stopping people mid thought, still giving language to things people have felt but never been able to say. He once said, "Don't let your learning lead to knowledge, let your learning lead to action." That's the whole thing right there. Not the podcast, not the seminar, not even this video. What matters is what you do in the next 24 hours with what you just heard. Whether you close this tab and go back to scrolling, or whether something in you shifts just slightly, just enough to make one different choice today. Because the most valuable 15 minutes of your day aren't spent watching a video. They're spent deciding, once and for all, who you are choosing to become. If this resonated with you, subscribe to The Honest Mind, where we dig into psychology, mindset, and human behavior to help you understand yourself and the world around you just a little bit better, one video at a time. And leave you with this one final thought from Jim Rohn himself. The same wind blows on us all, the winds of disaster, opportunity, and change. What matters is not the wind. What matters is, set of the sail, set your sail.